Mexican-American relations. Mexico and the United States have had a long and arduous relationship that spans for over hundreds of years. Even though Mexican immigration is a hot topic issue in today's politics, it has been a crucial part of American history since the years following the Mexican-American War. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo saw that half of Mexican territory above the Rio Bravo was given to the U.S., and with the land came the problem of residents who had resided there long before the war. While the U.S. gave some Mexicans U.S. citizenship, most were stripped of their land and were sent back. Since the war, Mexican migration has fluctuated on a consistent basis, but there are three major waves of migration that are of note. These are the years following the Mexican Revolution, the 1940s with the Bracero Program, and the present. After the Mexican Revolution. For almost 40 years, Mexico was under the rule of the dictator Porfirio Diaz. At the time, Mexico had an ethnic mestizo majority, which are people of native and European heritage. Diaz wanted to manipulate the population by whitening it, so he tried to introduce policies such as allowing more European immigrants into Mexico in order to create a homogeneous nation. The mestizos of Mexico fought to preserve their culture, and after a few years of infighting, Mexico was freed from the racist dictator and preserved their mestizaje. The revolution had created political and economic instability and thus forced thousands of Mexicans to migrate north to work in the fields and set businesses in the Southwest and Gulf Coast. Interestingly, New Orleans was one of the first cities outside the border states to experience a migration, as the Gulf Coast city has trading routes connecting to the Mexican states of Tabasco, Veracruz, Campeche, and Yucatan. The Bracero Program. The war has brought the draft, which sent millions of young American men off to Europe with no one to man the fields. The U.S. cooperated with Mexico to form the Mexican Farm Labor Agreement, which allowed Mexicans to enter the U.S. to work. The word bracero actually means one who works with his hands. The reason why is because it is believed that Mexicans are more likely to leave the U.S. because of the proximity to their homeland. It is believed that Europeans and Asian immigrants are much more likely to try and stay making life in the U.S. because of the long distance from home. But after the end of World War II, many Mexican migrants tried to stay in the U.S. because it provided better economic opportunity to Mexico, and therefore the U.S. implemented Operation Wetback. Operation Wetback was a joint effort by both governments to send Mexican nationals back home by swiftly rounding out Mexican people like cattle and sending them back to Mexico via bus or airplane. The quickness of the operation had created a lot of problems for Mexican Americans, as there was no opportunity to provide proof of citizenship, and thus hundreds or even thousands of Americans were illegally deported to Mexico. Present day. The most notable migration post-World War II was when NAFTA was ratified. The idea of NAFTA was created to halt the flow of immigrants by creating an economic pact between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. The result had terrible consequences, as the agreement forced Mexican farmers to grow corn without subsidies, and thus they cannot compete with the huge corn producers from the United States. NAFTA also prohibited price supports, so that prevented Mexico from protecting its own farmers, and the fluctuation of produce from the world market. With the U.S. produce being exported to Mexico at a rapid rate, Mexican farmers had no choice but to immigrate to the U.S. just to survive, and many did illegally because of the visa restrictions the U.S. places each year. It is estimated that since 1994, immigrants make up 9.8 million, or 30% of the foreign-born population, with more than half lacking proper documentation. Phobia against migrants. Xenophobia is defined as the fear and hatred of strangers or foreigners or anything that is foreign or strange. Xenophobia is a form of social conflict in which a group of people have a natural hate for others solely on the fact that they are different in terms of looks or culture. The idea of migrants stealing jobs is nothing new, as that prejudice has existed since immigration began in the U.S. Asians, Jews, Eastern Europeans, and even some Western Europeans were looked at as impoverished people who are beneath the Anglo-Saxon majority and thus are looked at as thieves and as danger to the ethnic majority. How they hate. There were vast differences between European and Mexican immigrations, one of which was cultural assimilation. Because of Mexico being neighbors with the U.S., Mexican immigrants were still able to retain their ethnic identity and their culture and thus did not fit into America's national identity. Many European immigrants eventually assimilated into the American national identity due to the simple reason that they either granted the status of white on arrival or earned that right later on. Mexicans are always treated as foreigners due to their mestizo background, strong ties to their culture, and close proximity to Mexico. This brought on the idea of nativism, which is strongly related to the both authoritarian value and expressions of intolerance. Nativism also created the very narrow definition of American identity as Anglo-Christian, English-speaking, and native-born. Because of the poor economic backgrounds these immigrants come from, many do not have a formal education and thus have to work in hard labor for wages that seem impractical to most Americans. Many migrants are willing to work in the fields to get paid per load of produce rather than per hour, how Americans are accustomed to. This situation has created a lot of hate by some communities as many of these people consider Mexican immigrants to be dirty, poorly educated, and a danger to American society. Also, the media does not help as major news networks try to portray immigrants as drug dealers, criminals, and rapists. Although crime does exist in the immigrant community, they are much less likely to perform violent crimes than their native-born counterparts simply due to the fear of being deported and being separated from their families. And finally, September 11th is one of the more interesting reasons why xenophobia against Mexican migration exists. After the events of 9/11, there was a growing disdain for Muslims, and many Americans looked at the border as a possible entrance for Muslim extremists to enter the country. Because of the fear for the potential attacks, there was a growing hate for the Mexicans because they believed that they violate traditional American values much like they believed that Muslims did for the same reason, and thus created policies to severely restrict Mexican immigration to the U.S. Frontera is an independent movie that clearly defines the native and positive portrayals of immigrants. The film depicts the life of Miguel Ramirez as he crosses the Mexican border in order to find a job to support his family. On his travels, Miguel was a witness to the death of a former police officer's wife as she fell off her started horse. The horse was started because a group of boys thought it was funny to shoot at Miguel and his companion in order to scare them back across the border. Miguel was caught in the act by the police officer who was looking for his wife, and thus a manhunt ensued and Miguel fled the scene. He is eventually caught by immigration and thus charged with first-degree murder of the officer's wife. Meanwhile, Miguel's wife leaves home in order to find Miguel, and on her travels, she is beaten, raped, and her family extorted by the coyotes who promised a safe trip to the U.S. in exchange for money. We see in the movie that Mexican migrants are willing to do everything in order to give their family a better life. But because these people are desperate to survive, they might resort to doing unlawful things such as rob for food or sneak into a country without documentation. Many people in the movie consider immigrants to be criminals, job stealers, and dangerous, which coincides with the ideals many Americans believe in, while some may see immigrants as innocent people looking for the American dream.